So this is a reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and I'll begin with a chant, the meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. Om Hridaya Kamala Madhye Rajitam Nirvikalpam Sada Sadakila Bedati Kameka Swarupam Prakriti Virkiti Shunyam Nityam Anandamurtim Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Nirupamamakti Shukshmam Nishprapancham Nirhiham Gagana Sadrisham Isham Sarvabhuta Divasam Triguna Rahita Satchit Brahmarupam Varenyam Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Vitaritum Avatirnam Jnana Bhakti Prashanti Pranaya Galata Chittam Jiva Dukha Sahishnu Drita Sahaja Samadhim Chinmayam Komalangam Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha. This knower of Brahman, ever established in his own nature, full of wisdom, self-possessed and self-lighted, eternal, the very image of that Brahman who is pure bliss, shining ceaselessly in the lotus of the heart, the one alone without parts, pure and still. This Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Subtle, fine and luminous, not even the shadow of the gross can ever reach him, for his purity is without parallel, untouched by Maya's webs of deceit, beyond the dark river of time and desire, vast as the sky, the Supreme Lord, the very essence of Brahman as existence and light. This Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Saturated with divine consciousness, his home is in all. He hears every cry. He knows every pain. Under the weight of its compassion, his heart can deny the need of none. Born to raise the world with teachings of knowledge, love, and peace. Born to bring mankind fresh songs of joy, this certain refuge of all, this Ramakrishna Paramahamsam, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. So I've been giving you some little readings or something at the beginning each time when I do this. I do this once a month. And last time we had a story from the Divine Joy play, that book, about Bhavatarini Ma and how she got initiated when she was just a little girl, about 5 years old, by Sri Ramakrishna. It really was very touching because she was, sort of a handful, to say the least. Anyway, but then she had a vision of him as light, and it really was quite nice. So tonight I'm going to give you a story of, another story about him initiating people. This is the story of him initiating Niranjan, which was one of the direct disciples. He had different ways of initiating different people, but a lot of times he would write something on their tongues. That was his method of giving the mantra, as well as saying it. Swami Sardananda writes, shortly after the arrival of Niranjan, the master called him aside and asked him to meditate. And then under the influence of divine inspiration, he touched certain parts of his body, like the chest or the tongue. By that potent touch, his mind became indrawn, and sense objects vanished from his perception. His accumulated impressions of the past were activated and produced spiritual realization in him. He also initiated him with a mantra. Niranjan later described this experience, quote, "I was then working in an office. One day I went to visit Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineswar. He wrote a mantra on my tongue and asked me to repeat it. What an experience. After returning home, even when my eyes were closed, I began to see innumerable fireflies in my room. The mantra was vibrating in my head and every limb of my body. I wanted to sleep, but I could not stop the repetition of japa. I had previously been unaware of this phenomena. I became scared, and I thought I would go out of my mind. After 3 days, I returned to Dakshineswar and to the master, and I said, 'Sir, what have you done to me?' After listening to my story, he laughed and withdrew the power of the mantram. He then said, 'It is called ajapa japa, the repetition of japa effortlessly and unceasingly.'" Latu Maharaj said, "One day the master touched Brother Niranjan, and for 3 days and 3 nights, Niranjan did not get one wink of sleep. He had the continuous vision of a mysterious light and kept repeating the Lord's name. His tongue could not stop saying japa for 3 days. Prior to meeting the master, Niranjan was employed by spiritualists as a medium for contacting spirits. So one day the master humorously said, 'Now, my boy, another ghost, the Holy Ghost, is upon you. However much you try, you will not be able to dismiss him.'" So that was his experience. I think he initiated Swamiji with the Rama mantra by writing on his tongue. But anyway, there's different stories, and I'll probably bring some of them at the beginning. I like to add a little something. So we're in the section which is called "With the Devotees of Dakshineswar." In this gospel, it's the regular big one. It's on page 235. And it's Tuesday, June 5th, 1883 is where we stopped. So I'll begin my reading there. Rakal and Hazra were staying with the master in the temple garden at Dakshineswar. M2 had been there since the previous Sunday. As it was a weekday, there were only a few devotees in the room. Generally, people gathered there in large numbers on Sundays or on holidays. It was afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was telling the devotees about his experiences during his God-intoxicated state. Master to M, "Oh, what a state I passed through. At that time, I didn't eat my meals here. I would enter the house of a Brahmin in the village, or at Bharanagor or at Aryadaha. Generally, it would be past mealtime, and I would just sit down there without saying a word. If the members of the household asked me why I'd come, I would simply say, 'I want something to eat.' Now and then I would go uninvited, of course, to Ram Chatterjee's house at Alambazar, or to the Chaudhurys at Dakshineswar. I didn't relish the food at the Chaudhurys' house. One day I begged Mathur to take me to Devendranath Tagore's house. I said, 'Devendranath chants the name of God. I want to see him. Will you please take me there?' Mathur Babu was a proud man. How could one expect him to go to another man's house uninvited? At first he hesitated, but then he said, 'All right, Devendra and I were fellow students. I will take you to him.' Another day I learned of a good man named Dina Mukherjee, living at Bagbazar near the bridge. He was a devotee. I asked Mother to take me there. Finding me insistent, he took me to Dina's house in a carriage. It was a small place. The arrival of a rich man in a big carriage embarrassed the inmates. We too were embarrassed. That day, Dina's son was being invested with the sacred thread. The house was crowded, and there was hardly any place for Dina to serve us. We were about to enter a side room when someone cried out, "Please don't go into that room. There are ladies there." It was really a very distressing situation. Returning Matur Babu said, "Father, I shall never listen to you again." And I laughed. Oh, what a state I passed through. Once Kumar Singh gave a feast to the sadhus and invited me too. I found a great many holy men assembled there. When I sat down for the meal, several sadhus asked me about myself. At once I felt like leaving them and sitting alone. I wondered why they should bother about all that. The sadhus took their seats. I began to eat before they had started, and I heard several of them remark, "Oh, what sort of man is this?" It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on the steps of his veranda. Hazra, Rakal, and M were near him. Hazra had the attitude of a Vedantist. I am he. Master to Hazra. Yes, all one's confusion comes to an end if one can only realize that it is God who manifests himself as the atheist and as the believer, the good and the bad, the real and the unreal, that it is he who is present in waking and in sleep, and that he is beyond all of these. There was a farmer to whom an only son was born when he was rather of an advanced age. As the child grew up, his parents became very fond of him. One day the farmer was out working in the fields when a neighbor told him that his son was dangerously ill, indeed at the point of death. Returning home, he found the boy dead. His wife wept bitterly, but his own eyes remained dry. Sadly, the wife said to her neighbors, "Such a son has passed away, and he hasn't even one tear to shed." After a long while, the farmer said to his wife, "Do you know why I'm not crying? Last night I dreamt I had become a king and the father of 7 princes. These princes were beautiful as well as virtuous. They grew in stature and acquired wisdom and knowledge in the various arts. Suddenly I woke up. Now I have been wondering whether I should weep for those 7 children or this one boy. To the jnanis, the waking state is no more real than the dream state. God alone is the doer. Everything happens by his will." Hazra, but it's very difficult to understand that. Take the case of the sadhu of Bukailas, how people tortured him and in a way killed him. They had found him in Samadhi. First they buried him and they put him under water, and then they branded him with a hot iron. Thus they brought him back to consciousness of the world. But in the end, the sadhu died as a result of these tortures. He undoubtedly suffered at the hands of men, though, as you say, he died by the will of God. Master, man must reap the fruit of his own karma. But as far as the death of that holy man is concerned, it was brought about by the will of God. The Kaviraj prepares Makarad Vaja in a bottle. Okay, now this is an Indian medicine made of mercury, sulfur, and the preparations of gold that acts as a catalyst. The bottle is covered with clay and heated in the fire. The gold inside of the bottle melts and combines with the clay and other ingredients. The medicine is made. Then the physicians break the bottle carefully and take out the medicine. When the medicine is made, what difference does it make whether the bottle is preserved or broken? So people think that the holy man was killed, but perhaps his inner stuff had been made. After the realization of God, what difference does it make whether the body lives or goes? The sadhu of Kailas was in samadhi. There are many types of samadhi. My own spiritual experiences tally with the words I heard from the sadhu of Rishikesh. Sometimes I feel the rise of a spiritual current inside me as though it were the creeping of an ant. Sometimes it feels like the movement of a monkey jumping from one branch to another. Again, sometimes it feels like a fish swimming in water. Only he who experiences it knows what it feels like. In samadhi, one forgets the world. When the mind comes down a little, I say to the Divine Mother, "Mother, please cure me of this. I want to talk to people." None but the Ishvara Kodis can return to the plane of relative consciousness after attaining samadhi. I think that means the highest samadhi. Some ordinary men attain samadhi through spiritual discipline, but they don't come back. But when God himself is born as a man, as an incarnation, holding in his hand the key to others' liberation, then, for the welfare of humanity, the incarnation returns from samadhi to the consciousness of the world. M to himself. Does the master hold in his hand the key to man's liberation? Hazra. The one thing needful is to please God. What does it matter whether an incarnation of God exists or not? It was the day of the new moon. Gradually night descended and dense darkness enveloped the trees and the temple. A few lights shone here and there in the temple gardens. The black sky was reflected in the waters of the Ganges. The master went to the veranda south of his room. A spiritual mood was the natural state of his mind. The dark night of the new moon, associated with the black complexion of Kali, the Divine Mother, intensified his spiritual exaltation. Now and then he repeated, Om, in the name of Kali. Om, Kali. He lay down on a mat and whispered to M, Master, yes, God can be seen. X has had a vision of God, but don't tell anyone about it. Tell me, which do you like better, God with form or the formless reality? M, Sir, nowadays I like to think of God without form, but I am also beginning to understand that it is God alone who manifests himself through different forms. Master, will you take me in a carriage someday to Mati Seal's garden house in Bulgaria? When you throw puff rice into the lake there, the fish come to the surface and eat it. I feel so happy to see them in sport in the water. That will awaken your spiritual consciousness too. You will feel as if the fish of the human soul were playing in the ocean of Satchidananda. In the same manner, I go into an ecstatic mood when I stand in a big meadow. I feel like a fish released from a bowl into a lake. He gives different examples of meditating on the formless, and these are two of the ones that he gives, and they're very good meditation tools for us. The idea of coming out in a meadow to coming out of a forest into a meadow where it's all open, that feeling that you get when it opens up. Spiritual discipline is necessary in order to see God. I had to pass through very severe discipline. How many austerities I practiced under the belt tree. I would lie down under it, crying to the Divine Mother, "O Mother, reveal thyself to me." The tears would flow in torrents and soak my body. You practice so many austerities, but people expect to realize God in a moment. Can a man build a wall just simply by moving his fingers around his home? Master, with a smile. Amrita says that one man lights a fire and 10 bask in its heat. I want to tell you something else. It is good to remain on the plane of the Leela after reaching the Nitya. You once said that one comes down to the plane of Leela in order to enjoy the divine play. Master, no, not exactly that. The Leela is true too. Let me tell you something. When you come here, bring a trifle with you. And there's a footnote here. The Hindu scriptures command the householder to visit a holy man with a suitable present. Perhaps I shouldn't say it. It may look like egotism. I also told Adar Sen that he should bring a pennyworth of something with him. I asked Bhavanath to bring a pennyworth of betel leaf. Have you noticed Bhavanath's devotion? Narendra and him seem like a man and a woman. He's devoted to Narendra. Bring Narendra here with you in a carriage, and also bring some sweets with you. It will do you good. Knowledge and love. Both are paths leading to God. Those who follow the path of love have to observe a little more outward purity, but the violation of this by a man following the path of knowledge cannot injure him. It is destroyed in the fire of knowledge. Even a banana tree is burnt up if it's thrown into a roaring fire. The Jnanis follow the path of discrimination. Sometimes it happens that, discriminating between the real and the unreal, a man loses his faith in the existence of God. But a devotee who sincerely yearns for God does not give up his meditation, even though he is invaded by atheistic ideas. A man whose father and grandfather have been farmers continue his farming even though he doesn't get a crop in a year of drought. Lying on the mat and resting his head on a pillow, Sri Ramakrishna continued the conversation. He said to him, "My legs are aching, please stroke them gently." Thus, out of his infinite compassion, the Master allowed his disciple to render him personal service. It was a summer day. The evening service in the Kali temple was over. Sri Ramakrishna stood before the image of the Divine Mother and waved the fan for a few minutes. Ram, Kedar Chatterjee, and Tarak arrived from Calcutta with flowers and sweets. Kedar was about 50 years old. At first, he had frequented the Brahmo Samaj and joined other religious sects in his search for God. But later on, he had accepted the Master as his spiritual guide. He was an accountant in the government office and lived in a suburb of Calcutta. Tarak was a young man of 24. His wife had died shortly after their marriage. He hailed from the village of Barasat, not far from Calcutta. His father, a highly spiritual soul, had visited Sri Ramakrishna many times. Tarak often went to Ram's house and used to go to Dakshineswar in company of Ram and Nitya Gopal. He worked in a business firm, but his attitude toward the world was one of utter indifference. Tarak became Swami Shivananda, who became one of the presidents of the order, actually, second. As Sri Ramakrishna came out of the temple, he saw Ram, Kedar, Tarak and other devotees standing outside. He showed his affection for Tarak by touching his chin. He was very happy to see him. Returning to his room, the master sat on the floor in an ecstatic mood, with his legs stretched out before him. Ram and Kedar decorated his feet with flowers and garlands. The master was in Samadhi. Kedar believed in certain queer practices of a religious sect to which he had once belonged, so he held the master's big toe in his hand, believing in this way the master's spiritual power would be transmitted to him. As Sri Ramakrishna regained partial consciousness, he said, "Mother, what can he do to me by holding my toe?" Kedar sat humbly with folded hands. Still in an ecstatic mood, the master said to Kedar, "Your mind is still attracted by women and gold. What is the use of saying you don't care for it? Go forward. Beyond the forest of sandalwood, there are many more things, mines of silver, gold, diamonds, and other precious stones. Having a glimpse of spirituality, don't think you have attained everything." The master was again in an ecstatic mood. He said to the Divine Mother, "Mother, take him away." At these words, Kedar's throat dried up. In a frightened tone, he said to Ram, "What is the master saying?" At the sight of Rakal, Sri Ramakrishna was again overpowered with spiritual mood. He said to his beloved disciple, "I have been here many days. When did you come?" Was the master hinting that he was an incarnation of God, and Rakal, his divine companion, a member of the inner circle of his devotees? Sunday, June 10th, 1883. The master was sitting in his room with Rakal, M, Latu, Kishori, Ram, Lal, Hazra, and other devotees. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Describing his early life, Sri Ramakrishna said to them, "During my younger days, the men and women of Kamarpukur were equally fond of me. They loved to hear me sing. I could imitate other people's gestures and conversation. I used to try to entertain them in that way. The women would put things aside for me to eat. No one distrusted me. Everyone took me in as one of the family. But I was like a happy pigeon. I used to frequent only happy families. I would run away from a place where I saw misery and suffering. One or two young boys of the village were my close friends. I was very intimate with some of them, but now they're totally immersed in worldliness. A few of them visit me here now and then. Goodness, they say, he seems to be just the same as he was in the village school. While I was at school, arithmetic would throw me into confusion, but I could paint very well, and I could also model and small images of the deities. I loved to visit the free eating places maintained for holy men and the poor, and I would watch them for hours. I loved to hear the reading of sacred books such as the Ramayana and the Bhagavata. If the reader had any affectations, I could easily imitate them and would entertain others with my mimicry. I understood the behavior of women very well, and I imitated their words and intonations. I could easily recognize immoral women, immoral widows, part their hair in the middle and perform their toilet with great care. They have very little modesty, and the way they sit is so different. But let's not talk of worldly things anymore. The master asked Ramlal to sing a song. Ramlal sang. Who is this terrible woman, dark as the sky at midnight? Who is this woman dancing over the field of battle? like a blue lotus that floats in a crimson sea of blood. Who is she, clad alone in the infinite for a garment, rolling her three great eyes in frenzy and savage fury? Under the weight of her tread, the earth itself is trembling. Shiva, her mighty husband, who wields the fearful trident, lies like a lifeless corpse beneath her conquering feet. The next song described the grief of Mandodari at the death of her husband Ravana. As he listened to it, the master shed tears of sorrow and said, "Once, when I was in the pine grove over there, I heard the boatmen on the Ganges singing that song, and I wept bitterly for a long time. I had to be brought back to my room." Ramlal sang about the love of the gopis for Sri Krishna. Akrura was about to drive Sri Krishna in a chariot from Vrindavan to Mathura. The gopis would not let him go. Some held the wheels of the chariot and others lay down in front of it. They blamed Akrura, not knowing that Sri Krishna was leaving them of his own will. Akrura was explaining this to the gopis. Ramlal sang, hold not the chariot's wheel. Is it the wheels that makes it move? The mover of its wheels is Krishna, by whose will the worlds are moved. About the gopis, the master said what deep love and ecstatic devotion they had for Krishna. Radha painted a picture of Krishna with her own hand, but did not paint his legs, lest he should be able to run away to Mathura. I used to sing these songs very often during my boyhood. I could reproduce the whole drama from memory. After his meal, Sri Ramakrishna sat on the couch. He had not yet found time to rest. The devotees began to assemble. One party arrived from Manirampur and another from Bulgaria. Some of the devotees said, "We have disturbed your rest." Master, "Oh no, what you say applies only to a Rajasic man. About him people say, 'Ah, and now he will enjoy his sleep.'" The devotees from Manipur asked the master how to realize God. "Master, you must practice spiritual discipline a little. It will not do simply to say that milk contains butter. You must let the milk set into curd and then churn it. Only then can you get butter from it. Spiritual aspirants must go into solitude now and then. After acquiring love of God in solitude, they may live in the world. If one is wearing a pair of shoes, one can easily walk over thorns. The most important thing is faith. As is a man's meditation, so is his feeling of love. As is a man's feeling of love, so is his gain. And faith is the root of all. If one has faith, one has nothing to fear. A devotee. Sir, is it necessary to have a guru? Master. Yes, many need a guru, but a man must have faith in the guru's words. He succeeds in spiritual life by looking on his guru as God himself. Therefore, the Vaishnavas speak of Guru, Krishna, and Vaishnava. There's a footnote here. The master meant that the Guru, Krishna, and Vaishnava were to be equally revered. One should honor the Vaishnavas because God dwells in his heart. One should constantly repeat the name of God. The name of God is highly effective in the Kali Yuga. The practice of yoga is not possible in this age For the life of man depends on food. Clap your hands while repeating God's name, and the birds of your sin will fly away. He used to do this in his own room in the evening. He would clap his hands and repeat all the names of God. He had various pictures in his room. Some of them are still there. You can see it if you go. And you can imagine it then afterward. One should always seek the company of the holy men. The nearer you approach the Ganges, the cooler the breeze will feel. And again, the nearer you go to a fire, the hotter the air will feel. But one cannot achieve anything through laziness and procrastination. People who desire worldly enjoyment say about spiritual progress, well, it will happen in time. We shall realize God sometime or other. I said to Keshav Sen, when a father sees that his son has become restless for his inheritance, he gives him his share of the property even 3 years before the legal time. A mother keeps on cooking while the baby's in bed sucking its toy, but when it throws the toy away and cries for her, she puts down the rice pot and takes the baby in her arms and nurses it. I said all this to Keshav. It is said that in the Kali Yuga, if a man can weep for God one day and one night, he sees him. Feel piqued at God and say to him, you have created me. Now you must reveal yourself to me. Whether you live in the world or elsewhere, always fix your mind on God. The mind soaked in worldliness may be compared to a wet matchstick. You won't get a spark, however much you rub it. Ekalavya placed the clay image of Drona, his teacher, in front of him, and thus learned archery. So there's a footnote. And the story of Ekalavya comes in the Mahabharata. Drona refused to teach Ekalavya archery because the latter belonged to a low caste. And thereupon, Ekalavya went to the forest and practiced archery before the clay image of Drona, whom he regarded as his teacher. In the course of time, he became an expert archer. When Drona discovered that he excelled even Arjuna, Drona's most beloved disciple in this art, he asked Ekalavya to give him his thumb as a teacher's fee. By carrying out this order, Ekalavya demonstrated his spirit of self-sacrifice and also his love for his teacher. I've never been able to forgive Arjuna for that because he asked him to do it. Anyway, the story of Ekalavya is a wonderful story. There's all kinds of stories in the Mahabharata, just little stories that have a lot of meaning. Go forward. The woodcutter, following the instructions of the holy man, went forward and found in the forest sandalwood and mines of silver and gold. And going still farther, he found diamonds and other precious stones. The ignorant are like people living in a house with clay walls. There is very little light inside, and they cannot see outside at all. But those who enter the world after attaining the knowledge of God are like people living in a house made of glass. For them, both inside and outside are light. They can see things outside as well as inside. Nothing exists except the One. That One is the Supreme Brahman. So long as he keeps the eye in us, he reveals to us that it is he who is the primal energy, and he creates, preserves, and destroys the universe. That which is Brahman is also the primal energy. Once a king asked a yogi to impart knowledge to him in one word, and the yogi said, "All right, you will get knowledge in one word. After a while, the magician came to the king. The king saw the magician moving two of his fingers rapidly and heard him explain, "Behold, O king, behold." The king looked at him amazed, when after a few minutes he saw the two fingers were becoming one. The magician moved that one finger rapidly and then said, "Behold, O king, behold." The implication of the story is that Brahman and the primordial energy at first appear as two. But after attaining knowledge of Brahman, one does not see the two. Then there's no differentiation. Then it is one without a second, Advaita, non-duality. The master was very happy to see a musician who had come with the devotees from Bulgaria. Sometime before, Sri Ramakrishna had gone into an ecstatic mood on hearing his devotional music. At the master's request, the musician sang a few songs, one of which described the awakening of the Kundalini and the 6 centers. Awake, mother, awake. How long hast thou been asleep in the lotus of the Muladhara? Fulfill thy secret function, mother. Rise to the 1,000-petaled lotus within the head, where mighty Shiva has his dwelling. Swiftly pierce its 6 lotuses and take away my grief, O essence of consciousness. Master, the song speaks of the Kundalini passing through the 6 centers. God is both within and without. From within, he creates the various states of mind. After passing through the 6 centers, the jiva goes beyond the realm of Maya and becomes united with the Supreme Soul. This is the vision of God. One cannot see God unless Maya steps aside from the door. Rama and Lakshmana and Sita were walking together. Rama was in front, Sita walked in the middle, and Lakshmana followed them. But Lakshmana couldn't see Rama because Sita was between them. In a like manner, man cannot see God because Maya is between them. Tumani Malik. But Maya steps aside from the door when God shows his grace to the devotee. When the visitor stands before the doorkeeper says to the master, "Sir, command us, and we shall let him pass." There are 2 schools of thought, Vedanta and the Purana. According to the Vedanta, this world is a framework of illusion. That is to say, it's illusory, like a dream. But according to the Puranas, the book of devotion, God himself has become the 24 cosmic principles. Worship God, both within and without. As long as God keeps the awareness of I in us, so long do sense objects exist, and we cannot very well speak of the world as a dream. There's a fire in the hearth. Therefore, the rice and the pulse and the potatoes and the other vegetables jump around in the pot. They jump about as if to say, "We're here, we're jumping. This is body is the pot. The mind and intelligence are the water. The objects of the senses are the rice, potatoes, and other vegetables. The I consciousness, identified with the senses, says, I am jumping about, and Satchidananda is the fire." Hence the Bhakti scriptures describe this very world as a mansion of mirth. Ram Prasad sang in one of his songs, "This world is a framework of illusion." Another devotee gave the reply, "This very world is a mansion of mirth." As the saying goes, the devotee of Kali, free while living, is full of eternal bliss. The bhakta sees that it is he who is God, has also become Maya. Again, he himself has become the universe and all its living beings. The bhakta sees God, Maya, and the universe, and the living beings as one. Some devotees see everything as Rama. It is Rama alone who has become everything. Some see everything as Radha and Krishna. To them, it is Krishna alone who has become the 24 cosmic principles. It is like seeing everything green through green glasses. But the bhakti scriptures admit the manifestation of powers are different in different beings. It is Rama who has become everything, no doubt, but he manifests himself more in some than in others. There is one kind of manifestation of Rama in the incarnation of God, and another in men. Even the incarnations are conscious of the body. Embodiments is due to Maya. Rama wept for Sita, but the incarnation of God put a bandage over his eyes by his own will, like children playing blind man's buff. The children stop playing when their mother calls them. It's quite different, however, with the ordinary man. The cloth his eyes are bandaged with is fastened to his back with screws, as it were. There are 8 fetters: shame, hatred, fear, caste, lineage, good conduct, grief, and secretiveness. These are the 8 fetters, and they cannot be unfastened without the help of a guru. A devotee: Sir, please bless us. Master: God is in all beings, but you must apply to the gas company. It will not connect the storage tank with the pipe in your house otherwise. You must pray earnestly. It is said that one can realize God by directing to him the combined intensity of 3 attractions, namely, the child's attraction for the mother, the husband's attraction for the chaste wife, and the attraction of the worldly possessions to the worldly man. There are certain signs by which you can know a true devotee of God. His mind becomes quiet as he listens to his teacher's instruction, just as the poisonous snake is quieted by the music of the charmer. I don't mean the cobra. There's another sign. A real devotee develops the power of assimilating instruction. An image cannot be impressed on bare glass, but on a glass stained with the black solution, as in photography. The black solution is devotion to God. There is a third kind of true devotee. The true devotee has control over his senses. He has subdued his lust. The gopis were freed from lust. You are talking about leading a householder's life. Suppose you are a householder. It rather helps in the practice of spiritual discipline. It's like fighting from inside of a fort. The tantrics sometimes use a corpse in their religious rites. Now and then the dead body frightens them by opening its mouth. That is why they keep fried rice and gram near them. From time to time they throw some of the grains into the corpse's mouth, thus to pacify the corpse. They repeat the name of the deity without any worry. Otherwise, the householder should pacify the wife and other members of his family. He should provide for them with food and other necessities. Thus, he removes the obstacles to his practice of spiritual disciplines. Those who still have a few worldly experiences to enjoy should lead a householder's life and pray to God. That is why Nityananda allowed the worldly to enjoy catfish soup in the warm embrace of a young woman while repeating God's name. But it's quite different with genuine sannyasis. A bee lights on a flower and on nothing else. To the chatak, all water except rain water is tasteless. It will drink no other water, but looks agape for the rain that falls. Excuse me. It drinks only that water. A real sannyasi will not enjoy any kind of bliss except the bliss of God. The bee lights only on the flowers. The real monk is like a bee, whereas the householder devotee is like a fly, which lights on festering sores as well as a sweetmeat. You've taken so much trouble to come here. You must be seeking God. But almost everyone is satisfied simply by the sea in the garden. Only one or two look for its owner. People enjoy the beauty of the world. They do not seek the owner. Pointing to the singer. A little while ago, he sang a song describing the 6 centers. These are dealt with in yoga. There are 2 kinds of yoga, Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. The Hatha Yoga practices physical exercises. His goal is to acquire supernatural powers. Longevity and the 8 psychic powers, these are his aims. But the aim of the Raja Yogi is the attainment of devotion, ecstatic love, knowledge, and renunciation. Of these 2, Raja Yoga is better. There is much similarity between the 7 planes described in the Vedanta and the 6 centers of yoga. The first 3 planes of the Vedas may be compared to the first 3 yogic centers, namely Muladhara, Swadhisthana, and Manipura. With ordinary people, the mind dwells in these 3 planes at the organs of excavation, generation, and the navel. When the mind ascends to the 4th plane, the center designated in yoga as anahata, it sees the individual soul as a flame. Besides, it sees a light. At this center, the aspirant cries, "Ah, what is this? What is this?" When the mind rises to the 5th plane, the aspirant wants to hear only about God. This is the Vishuddha center of the yoga. The 6th plane is the center of knowledge known as ajna, and it's one and the same. When the mind rises there, the aspirant sees God, but still there is a barrier between God and the devotee. It's like the barrier of glass in a lantern, which keeps one from touching the light. King Janaka used to give instruction about Brahmajnana from the 5th plane. Sometimes he dwelt on the 5th plane and sometimes in the 6th. After passing the 6 centers, the aspirant arrives at the 7th plane. Reaching it, the mind merges in Brahman. The individual soul and the Supreme Soul become one. The aspirant goes into Samadhi. His consciousness of the body disappears. He loses the knowledge of the outer world. He does not see the manifold anymore. His reasoning comes to a stop. Trilanga Swami once said that because a man reasons, he is conscious of multiplicity, of variety. Attaining Samadhi, one gives up the body in 21 days. Spiritual consciousness is not possible without the awakening of the Kundalini. A man who has realized God shows certain characteristics. He becomes like a child or a madman or an inert thing or a ghoul. Further, he's firmly convinced that he is the machine and God is its operator, that God alone is the doer and all others are his instruments. As some Sikh devotee once said to me, even the leaf moves because of God's will. One should be aware that everything happens by the will of Rama. The weaver said, the price of the cloth by the will of Rama is 1 rupee and 6 annas. By the will of Rama, the robbery was committed. By the will of Rama, the robbers were arrested. By the will of Rama, I too was arrested by the police. At last, by the will of Rama, I was released. It was dusk. Sri Ramakrishna had had no rest since his midday meal. He had talked unceasingly to the devotees about God. At last, the visitors took their leave and went home. I think we'll stop there tonight. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same.